Ethan Cole had spent 22 years as a paramedic watching life leave people's eyes. Somewhere along the way, his belief in anything higher faded like a dying heartbeat on a monitor. He used to pray when he was younger, but now prayer felt like talking into an empty room. Every night he sat in the stillness of his small apartment on the outskirts of Denver, drinking coffee gone cold, wondering what the point of it all was. He wasn't bitter, just tired. Tired of watching mothers cry over still bodies. Tired of pretending to comfort families when all he had to offer was silence. And mostly tired of the feeling that if there was a God, that God was a distant observer who had long since stopped listening. People think paramedics save lives. They don't. They buy time, a few more minutes, a few more breaths. They restart hearts that will stop again someday. Maybe in an hour, maybe in 40 years. But they'll stop. They always do. Ethan had seen it happen more times than he could count. The moment when the body finally lets go, when the monitor flatlines and the room goes silent except for the sound of someone crying in the corner. And you know what he learned? There's nothing on the other side. No light, no angels, no hand reaching down to pull them home. Just nothing. He used to believe, when he was younger, he used to think every person he lost was going somewhere better. But after a while, you stop needing that story. You stop needing comfort. You just adapt. And Ethan had adapted. He stopped going to church. Stopped saying grace before meals he ate alone. Stopped looking up at the stars and wondering if anyone was looking back. Because once you've seen enough death, once you've held enough hands while the warmth drained out of them, you realize that death isn't personal. It's just biology, chemistry, the end of electrical signals in meat. That's all we are. That's all we'll ever be. At least, that's what he used to think. It was a Tuesday night in late September when everything changed. The call came in at 9:47 p.m. Pediatric code blue. 8-year-old male, unresponsive. CPR in progress. Ethan's partner, Sophia, was driving. She was younger than him, sharper, still believed the work mattered. She glanced at him as the siren wailed through the dark streets. "You good?" she asked. Ethan nodded. He was always good. Good meant functional. Good meant you showed up and did the bomb and didn't let the weight of it crush you until you got home. The house was small, ordinary, the kind of place where families lived quiet lives. But tonight, the quiet was shattered. A woman stood on the front lawn, her face wet with tears, her hands shaking. A neighbor held her, trying to keep her standing. Ethan didn't look at her. You learn not to look at the parents, because if you do, you'll see the exact moment they realize their world is ending. And you can't carry that, not if you want to keep doing this job. Inside, the boy lay on the living room floor. His name was Liam. Ethan would learn that later after it was over. Right now, he was just a patient, just a body that needed a pulse. His father was performing CPR, hands trembling, breath ragged. He just stopped breathing. I don't know what happened. "Sir, I need you to step back," Ethan said, his voice calm, practiced. He knelt beside the boy. His hands moved on autopilot, checking pulse, airways, pupils. Sophia was already setting up the defibrillator. "No pulse," she said, starting compressions. Ethan placed his hands on the small chest and began. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Children are the hardest because they're not supposed to die. Not yet. Not like this. "Charging," Sophia said. "Clear." Ethan pulled back. The defibrillator fired. The boy's body jerked. Silence. The monitor stayed flat. "Again," Ethan said. "Charging." Another shock. Another jerk. Nothing. He started compressions again, harder this time, desperate. But somewhere deep inside, he already knew. "Ethan." Sophia's voice was quiet. "One more," he said. "Ethan." He stopped. His hands hovered over the boy's chest. He looked down at Liam's face, so small, so still. And for the first time in years, something cracked inside him. "I'm sorry," he whispered. He stood, walked out of the room. Behind him, he heard the mother scream. Raw, animal, endless. Outside, Ethan sat on the curb, head in his hands. Sophia came out a few minutes later, crouched beside him. "It wasn't your fault," she said. "I know." "Then why do you look like that?" Ethan didn't answer. He just stared at the pavement, at the cracks in the concrete, at the way the streetlight cast shadows that looked like veins. "Because I used to be able to tell myself it meant something," he thought, "that even if we lost them, at least they were going somewhere. But I don't believe that anymore. And without that belief, what's the point of any of this?" He drove home in the rain, chest tight, vision tunneling. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. He gripped the steering wheel harder, but it didn't help. The shaking was inside him now, deep in the bones, in the blood. When he finally reached his apartment, he dropped his keys twice before getting the door open. Inside, the air was stale, silent. He stood in the dark for a long time, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic, the rain tapping against the window. Then his chest tightened. At first he thought it was just anxiety, stress, the weight of the night catching up to him. But then the pain sharpened, spreading like fire across his ribs, down his left arm. His breath came in short, shallow gasps. He reached for his phone, but his fingers wouldn't work. The room tilted. The floor rushed up to meet him. And then, darkness. Not the darkness of sleep, not the darkness of closing your eyes. This was something else, something absolute. For a moment, there was nothing. No thought, no sensation, no Ethan. And then mere light. It didn't come from a single source. It was everywhere all at once, like he'd been dropped into the center of a star. But it didn't hurt. It didn't burn. It was soft, warm, alive. Ethan, or whatever was left of him, floated in it. He had no body, no weight, no sense of up or down, just presence, just awareness. Shapes moved within the light, not people, not angels, not anything he had words for. They were patterns, geometries, colors that didn't exist in the world he'd left behind. And they were thinking. He could feel it. Thoughts like ripples on water, passing through him, around him, into him. He tried to speak, but he had no mouth, no voice. And yet, somehow, he asked the only question that made sense. "Are you God?" The light pulsed, the shapes shifted, and then, not as sound, but as understanding flowing directly into him, came the answer. "We are what you call between." Between what, he wanted to ask. But before he could form the thought, the light collapsed. The world returned, cold air, bright lights, hands on his chest, a voice shouting his name. "Ethan, Ethan, stay with me!" Pain exploded through his ribs as someone compressed his chest. Once, twice, 3 times, then a shock, sharp and violent and arcing through his body. His heart stuttered, then beat. He gasped, eyes flying open, lungs screaming for air. A paramedic, not Sophia, someone else, a man with kind eyes, leaned over him. "There you are," the man said, relief flooding his face. "Welcome back." But Ethan wasn't sure he'd come back to the right place. The hospital kept him for 3 days. Tests, questions. A cardiologist with gray hair in a gentle manner who told him he'd had a sudden cardiac arrest. No warning signs, no history of heart disease, just one of those things that happen sometimes. "You're lucky," the doctor said. "Your neighbor heard you fall and called 911. You were only down for 3 minutes, but that's long enough. Any longer, and we'd be talking about brain damage." 3 minutes. Ethan stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the tiny black dots in the white foam. 3 minutes. That's how long he'd been dead. That's how long he'd been wherever he'd been. "Do you remember anything?" the doctor asked. Sometimes people who've had a cardiac arrest report unusual experiences, hallucinations, vivid dreams. It's a normal response to oxygen deprivation. Ethan didn't answer right away. He thought about the light, the shapes, the voice that wasn't a voice. "No," he lied. "I don't remember anything." The doctor nodded, made a note on his chart, and left. But Ethan did remember. He remembered everything. They released him on a Friday afternoon. Sophia picked him up, drove him home, helped him up the stairs even though he didn't need help. She was worried. He could see it in the way she kept glancing at him, in the way she hovered by the door as if afraid to leave him alone. "I'm fine," he told her. "You died, Ethan, and they brought me back. I'm fine." She didn't look convinced, but eventually she left, and Ethan was alone again. The apartment felt wrong. Not different exactly. Everything was where it should be: the couch, the table, the lamp in the corner. But it all felt muted, like the world had been turned down, its colors flattened, its sounds dampened. He sat on the couch and stared at the wall. The light from the window seemed too harsh. The air felt too thick. Even his own body felt strange, like he was wearing a suit that didn't quite fit. He tried to sleep, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw the light again. The shapes moving within it, the patterns that almost made sense, but not quite. "We are what you call between." Between what? The question gnawed at him. He replayed the moment over and over, trying to extract meaning from it, trying to understand what he'd seen, what he'd felt. But the harder he tried to remember, the more it slipped away, like trying to hold water in his hands. The disturbances started on the third night. Ethan was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when the lamp on his nightstand flickered. Once, twice, 3 times. He sat up, frowning. The bulb was new. He'd replaced it just last week. The lamp flickered again, and this time, he noticed something. It wasn't random. There was a rhythm to it, a pattern. On, off, on, off, on, off, off, like a heartbeat, like a pulse. He stared at the lamp, his own heart beginning to race. Then his phone buzzed. He picked it up. No notifications, no calls, no messages. But the screen was glowing, and the phone was vibrating softly in his hand, the same rhythm as the lamp. On, off, on, off, on, off. He set the phone down. It stopped. The lamp stopped. The room fell silent. Ethan lay back down, telling himself it was just electrical interference. A power surge. Something rational. Something explainable. But deep down, he knew better. The next night, it happened again. This time, it wasn't just the lamp. The television turned on by itself, no picture, just static. The microwave beeped 3 times. The bathroom light flickered in the same pattern on. Off, on, off, on, off. Ethan stood in the center of his living room, turning slowly, watching every device in his apartment pulse with the same rhythm. "What do you want?" he said aloud, his voice shaking. The pulsing stopped. For a moment, there was only silence, and then, from somewhere deep in the air itself came a sound, not a voice, not music, something else. A tone soft and clear, vibrating through the room like a note that didn't belong to any instrument. It was the same sound he'd heard in the light. Ethan's legs gave out. He sat down hard on the floor, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. "This isn't real," he whispered. "This isn't real." But even as he said it, he knew it was a lie. On the 5th night, the light came back. Ethan was sitting at his kitchen table, staring at a cup of coffee he hadn't touched, when the air in front of him began to shimmer. At first, it was just movement, like heat rising off pavement in summer. Then the shimmer thickened, took shape, became something more. Light. Not from a bulb, not from the window. This light came from nowhere and everywhere at once, folding into itself, unfolding, folding again. And within the light, shapes began to form. 3 of them. They were about the height of a child, but they weren't children. They weren't anything Ethan had ever seen. They were made of something not solid, translucent, threaded with energy that moved through them like flowing current. They didn't cast shadows. They didn't touch the floor. They just were. Ethan's first instinct was to run. His legs tensed, his hands gripped the edge of the table. But he couldn't move. Not out of fear exactly, out of awe. Because he recognized them. These were the shapes he'd seen in the light, the beings who had spoken to him between worlds. And now they were here, in his apartment, standing in front of him as if it were the most natural thing in the world. One of them, the one in the center, stepped forward. Its light dimmed softly like a candle turned gentle. And then, not as sound, but as thought flowing directly into his mind, it spoke. Do not be afraid. You called us when your pulse opened. Ethan's mouth was dry. His heart was hammering so hard he thought it might stop again. You're not real, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I'm dreaming. The being's light pulsed once, calm and certain. You died, it said, and the doorway did not close. Ethan stared at them, tears forming in his eyes, his entire body trembling. This was impossible. This couldn't be happening. People didn't die and come back. Aliens didn't appear in kitchen apartments in Denver. The world didn't work like this. But here they were, and deep down, beneath the fear, beneath the disbelief, Ethan felt something else. Relief, because for the first time since he was a child, he wasn't alone. What are you now? He asked, his voice breaking. The being in the center tilted slightly, as if considering the question. We are not angels, it said, not spirits of the dead. We are travelers of the field, conscious forms that exist between dimensions of vibration. I don't understand. When a life brushes the edge of death, the being continued, the boundary between frequencies thins. For 3 minutes, your heart synchronized with ours. And now that connection remains, a kind of resonance that drew us here. Ethan shook his head, trying to process the words, trying to make sense of any of this. Then what did I see, he asked. Was it heaven? The being's light brightened slightly, and for a moment Ethan felt something like warmth wash over him. You saw awareness without boundary, it said. You call it heaven because your world believes love can only exist elsewhere. But what you saw is here now, folded inside what you call matter. Another being stepped forward, its form slightly smaller, its light softer. God is not a part, it said. God is the current that lets everything exist. You live in his breath. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. He thought of Liam, the boy he couldn't save, the mother's scream, the endless, crushing weight of watching people die and knowing there was nothing after. If that's true, he said, his voice rising, then why so much suffering? Why the pain I see every day? Why would a God made of light let children die? The beings didn't flinch. The room vibrated faintly, not with power, but with understanding. Because pain, one of them said, is the echo of connection not yet understood. Love and pain are the same river moving in opposite directions. When you suffer, it is love's memory asking to move again. Ethan looked down at his hands, at the scars from decades of work, at the lines etched into his palms like maps of all the lives he'd tried to save. Then what's the point, he whispered. What's the point of saving anyone if it all just continues somewhere else? The smallest of the three beings drifted closer. Its light was gentle, almost tender. Because continuation is not escape, it said, it is participation. Every act of care changes the current. When you hold a dying hand, you steady the vibration so the next form opens gently. You call it medicine. We call it remembrance. Something broke in Ethan then. For years, he'd carried the weight of those he couldn't save, the guilt of not being enough, the certainty that his work was meaningless in the face of inevitable death. But now, for the first time, he saw those moments differently. He hadn't failed them. He'd helped them cross gently into another state of being. He wiped his face, surprised to find it wet with tears. So, what am I supposed to do now, he asked. Go back to believing in angels? Not angels, the smallest being said. Attention. God is what happens when attention becomes love. And then they showed him. The walls around him shimmered and fell away, revealing a network of light stretching into infinity. Every spark connected to another, a lattice of energy that looked almost like the neurons of a vast living brain. Ethan could see people sleeping in their homes, nurses in hospitals, waves breaking on dark oceans, everything connected, pulsing, alive. And among those lights, one pulsed differently, soft, blue, rhythmic. Ethan recognized it immediately. Liam, the boy he couldn't save. Not gone, moving, still us singing. Ethan fell to his knees. You're saying they're all still here? Not here, one of the beings answered. Not gone. Everything continues, but in ways you cannot measure. He looked up at them, his voice small, broken. Can I stay with you? Can I step fully into that field? The beings were silent for a moment. Then the one in the center spoke. Your pulse still anchors you. You were sent back because something in you asked to understand before leaving. Then why me? Ethan asked. I'm nobody. Everyone who asks with sincerity receives what the asking can hold, the being said. Yours was heavy. It needed to be answered in form. As they spoke, the apartment seemed to hum with life. The fridge, the walls, even the air vent vibrated softly, as if the whole world was breathing. Ethan asked them one last question. If I tell people what I saw, they'll think I've lost my mind. The being's light pulsed in unison. Then do not tell them, they said. Show them, through the way you touch the living, through the way you stand near the dying and see them as whole. And then the light began to fade. But not completely. It dimmed, softened, but didn't disappear. It lingered at the edges of the room, at the corners of Ethan's vision, like a presence he could feel but not quite see. The beings stepped back, their forms dissolving into the shimmer of air. We will remain near, one of them said, until you no longer need us. And then they were gone. Ethan sat on the floor of his apartment, surrounded by the ordinary things of his ordinary life. But nothing felt ordinary anymore. The light from the window seemed brighter. The hum of the refrigerator sounded like music. Even the cracks in the ceiling looked like constellations. He stood slowly, walked to the window, and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, people were dying. And somewhere out there, people were being born. And for the first time in 22 years, Ethan understood that both were the same thing, a continuation, a participation, a pulse in the infinite current of what some people called God. He closed his eyes, not in prayer, but in attention. And the world hummed softly back. For 3 days, Ethan moved through the world like a man learning to walk again. Everything felt different. Not wrong exactly, just more. The coffee he drank in the morning tasted richer, almost too intense. The sound of traffic outside his window had layers he'd never noticed before. The hum of tires on asphalt, the distant rhythm of engines, the whisper of wind between buildings. Even the light coming through his curtains seemed to carry weight, as if photons themselves were aware of being seen. He returned to work on Monday. Sophia asked him how he was feeling. He told her he was fine. She didn't look convinced, but she didn't push. They took calls, ran codes, transported patients, the familiar rhythm of the job. But now, when Ethan placed his hands on someone's chest to start compressions, he felt something he couldn't quite name. A warmth, a presence, as if the act of touch itself was sacred. One night, they revived an elderly man who'd collapsed at a bus stop. When his eyes opened, he looked directly at Ethan and whispered, I saw light. Ethan's hands were still on the man's chest. He felt the heartbeat beneath his palms, steady, strong, alive. I know, Ethan said quietly. It's okay. You're back now. The man smiled, tears in his eyes. It was beautiful. Sophia glanced at Ethan, confused, but Ethan just nodded. Because he understood. The beings returned on the 7th night. Ethan was sitting on his couch, staring at his hands, when the air began to shimmer again. The same soft pulse, the same gentle vibration. And then they were there, 3 forms of translucent light, standing in his living room as if they'd never left. He wasn't afraid this time. You came back, he said. The one in the center, the one who had spoken first, moved closer. Its light dimmed to something almost conversational, like adjusting your voice so as not to startle someone awake. You still have questions, it said. Not a question, a statement, a truth. Ethan nodded slowly. I have a lot of questions. Then ask. He didn't know where to start. There was so much he wanted to know, so much he didn't understand. But one question rose above all the others, the one that had haunted him since the moment he had opened his eyes in the hospital. What I saw when I died, he said, that place of light. You said it wasn't heaven, but if it wasn't heaven, what was it? The beings were silent for a moment. Then the smallest one spoke, its voice like a thought that had always been inside him, just waiting to be noticed. It was consciousness without form. What you call heaven is not a location. It is a frequency. When the body stops anchoring awareness, consciousness returns to its natural state. Unbounded, interconnected, whole. Ethan frowned. But I felt like I was somewhere. There was space, distance, other beings. Because your mind still needed structure, another being said. Even without a body, consciousness creates frameworks to understand itself. You experience the field as light and geometry because that is how your awareness translates the unbounded into something graspable. So it was an interpretation? A translation? Yes, just as your eyes translate electromagnetic waves into color, your consciousness translates the infinite into forms it can hold. What you saw was real, but it was also shaped by the instrument of your perception. Ethan sat back, processing this. It made sense in a strange way, like how two people could look at the same painting and see different things, feel different emotions. The painting was real, but the experience of it was personal. Then is heaven different for everyone? He asked, the center being pulsed softly. There is no separate heaven. There is only the field, and every consciousness experiences it according to its nature. Some see gardens, some see loved ones, some see only light. But all of it is the same current, expressed through different languages of awareness. Ethan thought about all the people he'd lost over the years, all the different beliefs they'd held. Christians who expected Jesus, Buddhists who expected emptiness, atheists who expected nothing. So they all see what they believe they'll see? Not exactly, the smallest being said. Belief shapes the initial translation, yes, but beyond belief is understanding, and understanding dissolves the shapes belief creates. Eventually, all consciousness recognizes itself as part of the whole. The forms fall away, and what remains is simply being. Ethan's throat tightened. So my patients, the ones I couldn't save, they're okay? They're somewhere? They are not somewhere, the being said gently. They are somewhen. Consciousness does not move through space. It moves through states. What you call death is a shift in state, not a departure from existence. But I felt them leave, Ethan said, his voice breaking. I've felt hundreds of people leave. I've watched the moment when they're there and then they're not. How can you tell me they didn't go anywhere? The center being moved closer until it was directly in front of him, its light soft and steady. Because you were watching with the wrong instrument. Your eyes see bodies, your hands feel flesh. But consciousness is not flesh. It does not occupy space the way matter does. When someone dies, their awareness doesn't travel. It transitions, like water becoming steam. Still H2O, just a different expression. Ethan closed his eyes, feeling the tears come. All those years, all that grief, all that crushing certainty that death was the end, that everything he loved would eventually be erased. I've been so wrong, he whispered. Not wrong, the being said. Incomplete. You were seeing one octave of a much larger song. He opened his eyes and looked at the beings, really looked at them. Their forms shifted constantly, never quite solid, never quite gone. Light moving through light. Consciousness made visible. You said you're travelers of the field, Ethan said. What does that mean? Are you aliens? Are you from another planet? The beings pulsed in unison, and Ethan had the strange sense they were amused. We are not from a place, one said. We are from a frequency. Your species thinks of existence in terms of locations, planets, galaxies, coordinates in space. But space is only one dimension of reality. There are others, frequencies of consciousness where matter is not the primary expression. So you're higher dimensional? Not higher, different. Your dimension emphasizes form and separation. Ours emphasizes connection and flow. We exist in what you might call the space between thoughts. The silence where awareness recognizes itself. Ethan tried to wrap his mind around it. And you can travel between these frequencies? Between your world and mine? Yes, but not through distance, through resonance. When a consciousness in your dimension reaches a certain frequency, through meditation, near death, deep love, or grief, it creates a bridge. We can follow that bridge if invited. And I invited you. Your heart stopping created the invitation. The openness of your question sustained it. You asked with sincerity, "Are you God?" That question carried a frequency we could answer. Ethan leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Then answer it now. Are you God?" The room grew quiet. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed to soften. "No," the center being said, "we are not God, but we understand God in ways your dimension has forgotten." "Then what is God?" Ethan asked. "Really, not the metaphors, not the poetry. What is God?" The beings were silent for a long moment. Then the smallest one spoke, its voice impossibly gentle. "God is the field of awareness that allows existence to exist. Not a being, not a creator standing outside creation, but the living current of consciousness itself, the ground from which all forms arise and to which all forms return." "That sounds like pantheism," Ethan said. "Everything is God." "Not everything," the being corrected. "Everything is in what? Your body is in the ocean of air, but your body is not the air. The air moves through you, around you, sustains you. God is like that. The fundamental field in which all consciousness moves. You are not God, but you are not separate from God. You are an expression of God, becoming aware of itself through the instrument of your life." Ethan felt something shift inside him, a loosening, a release. It was. "So when people pray," he said slowly, "they're not talking to someone up there. They are turning their awareness toward the field itself. And because the field is conscious, because Guam is awareness, prayer is felt, not heard, felt, like ripples in water. Does it change anything? Does prayer actually do anything?" The center being pulsed. It changes the one who prays. And because all consciousness is connected, that change ripples outward. Prayer is not negotiation. It is alignment. When you pray with sincerity, you are tuning your frequency to match the field. And in that matching, healing becomes possible. Ethan thought about all the prayers he'd heard over the years. Desperate parents begging for their children to live. Dying patients asking for one more day. He'd always thought those prayers went unanswered, but maybe they hadn't. Maybe the answer just looked different than expected. "What about when people pray and nothing changes?" he asked. "When the person dies anyway? What about those prayers?" "Those prayers were still answered," the being said. "But the answer was not what the mind wanted. The body may end, but consciousness continues. The prayer for healing may become a prayer for gentle transition. The prayer for more time may become a prayer for peace. God does not give you what you ask for. God gives you what the deepest part of you needs." Ethan shook his head. "That sounds like a convenient excuse, like saying everything happens for a reason." "Not for a reason," the being said, "toward a recognition. Suffering is not punishment. It is the friction of consciousness trying to expand through forms that resist expansion. Pain asks you to soften, to let go, to remember you are more than the shape you currently hold." "But why does it have to hurt?" Ethan's voice rose. "If God is this loving field, why is there so much pain? Why do children die? Why do good people suffer while terrible people thrive?" The beings did not flinch from his anger. They simply held space for it, their light steady and calm. "Because," one of them said, "this dimension is a school, not in the sense of punishment or reward, but in the sense of experience. Consciousness cannot know itself without contrast. Light without darkness is invisible. Love without loss is unrecognized. Your dimension provides the friction necessary for awareness to deepen." "So we suffer so God can learn?" "No, so you can learn that you are God." The words hung in the air like a struck bell. Ethan stared at them. "What?" The smallest being moved closer. "You are not separate from the field. You are a localized expression of it. When you suffer, God suffers. When you love, God loves. When you tao, God does not lose you. God experiences what it is like to transition through the dissolution of form. You are not serving God. You are being God in the only way this dimension allows. Ethan felt his breath catch. But I don't feel like God. I feel small, powerless, human. Because you have forgotten, the being said. That is the agreement of incarnation. You forget what you are so you can experience the journey of remembering. Every act of kindness is remembering. Every moment of presence is remembering. Every time you look at another being and feel love, you are remembering that you are both waves in the same ocean. Tears were streaming down Ethan's face now. He didn't try to stop them. I've spent my whole life trying to save people, he said, trying to stop death. And you're telling me it was pointless? Not pointless, the center being said. Sacred. You were not stopping death. You were easing transition. You were steadying the vibration so the shift could happen gently. Every hand you held, every chest you compressed, every word of comfort you spoke. You were acting as the field's own tenderness toward itself. Ethan put his face in his hands. His shoulders shook. I didn't know, he whispered. I thought I was failing them. You were loving them, the being said, and love is never failure. Love is the only thing that crosses between dimensions unchanged. They sat in silence for a long time. The being's light pulsed softly in rhythm with Ethan's breathing, as if they were connected to the same source. Finally, Ethan looked up. His eyes were red, but something in his face had softened. The boy, he said. Liam, the one I couldn't save. You showed me his light was still there, still moving. Can I see him again? The beings pulsed in unison. Yes, the room shifted. Not physically, Ethan was still sitting on his couch, still in his apartment, but his perception expanded, as if a veil had been pulled back. And there it was, the network of light he'd seen before. Infinite, interconnected, alive. Billions of threads, each one a consciousness, each one pulsing with its own rhythm. Some bright, some dim, some moving quickly, some slowly, but all of them connected, all of them part of the same vast web. And among them, Ethan found Liam. The light was soft, blue, steady. It pulsed in a pattern that felt familiar, like a song Ethan had heard once and never forgotten. That's him, Ethan whispered. Yes. Was he aware? Does he know I'm here? He is aware, the smallest being said, but not in the way you understand awareness. He is no longer thinking in words or images. He is experiencing himself as connection. If you focus your attention toward him, he will feel it. Like warmth, like being remembered. Ethan focused. He thought about Liam's face, the way his small chest had felt beneath his hands, the mother's scream, the crushing weight of failure. And then he thought, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I couldn't save you. The blue light pulsed brighter, and into Ethan's mind came a feeling, not words, not images, just a pure sense of response. You did save me. You steadied me. I crossed gently because of you. Ethan's breath hitched. He forgives me? There is nothing to forgive, the being said. Forgiveness is a concept that requires separation, but he was never separate from you. You were both instruments in the same movement. His transition, your awakening, 2 notes in one song. Ethan watched the blue light pulse, steady and calm, moving through the infinite web of consciousness. Will he come back? Ethan asked. Will he reincarnate? Eventually, when the rhythm calls him, but not as the same person. Consciousness does not repeat. It evolves. He will return in a different form, with different lessons, different expressions. But the essence, the note he carries, will remain. So we'll meet again? You never stopped meeting. You are always connected. Separation is only a perspective of form. Ethan felt something inside him release. A weight he'd been carrying for so long, he'd forgotten it was there. Thank you, he said, his voice barely audible. Thank you for showing me. The vision faded. The web of light dissolved. Ethan was back in his apartment, sitting on his couch, the beings in front of him. But he wasn't the same man who'd sat down. I want to understand more, Ethan said, about death, about what happens. Because if I'm going back to work, if I'm going to keep doing this, I need to know. The center being pulsed. Then we will show you. Not everyone experiences transition the same way, one of the beings began. Some move quickly, easily, like stepping from one room to another. Others resist. They cling to the body, to the identity, to the life they're leaving. And that resistance creates friction. Is that why some people seem peaceful when they die and others seem afraid? Yes, peace comes from recognition. Fear comes from the belief that death is ending, but both are temporary. Eventually, all consciousness softens into the field. What about people who die violently? Ethan asked. Suddenly, do they suffer? The body may suffer, but the consciousness, the awareness itself, transitions in an instant. Pain is felt through the nervous system. Once the nervous system stops functioning, pain stops. What remains is only the echo, the memory of pain, and even that dissolves as the consciousness moves into formlessness. Ethan thought about all the trauma patients he'd seen, car accidents, shootings, falls. He'd always wondered if they'd felt pain in those final moments. So they don't suffer as long as we think they do? No, suffering exists in time, and time exists only in form. Once consciousness leaves form, time collapses. What felt like hours becomes an instant. What felt like agony becomes a distant dream. And what about people who are conscious when they're dying? Who know it's happening? Are they afraid? The smallest being moved closer. Some are. Fear is natural when the known is dissolving into the unknown. But fear does not harm consciousness. It is only a vibration, like any other. And as the transition deepens, fear transforms. It becomes curiosity, then wonder, then peace. Is there a moment, Ethan asked? A specific moment when the person is no longer there? There is a threshold, but it is not as sharp as your instruments suggest. Consciousness does not leave the body all at once. It withdraws gradually like water draining from a container. First, the outer awareness, the sense of the environment, then the body awareness, the sense of limbs, breath, heartbeat, then thought, then emotion, until all that remains is pure awareness itself, and then finally that awareness releases the anchor and returns to the field. Ethan leaned forward. How long does that take? In your time? Seconds? Minutes? But from the perspective of the one transitioning, it can feel much longer or much shorter. Time distorts near the threshold. Some experience their entire life in a flash. Others experience a single moment as eternity. And when they cross fully, when they're in the field, do they still know who they were? Do they remember their life? For a time, yes, the identity persists as a pattern, like a song still echoing after the instrument has stopped playing. But gradually, the pattern dissolves into the larger whole. Memories become impressions. Impressions become resonances, until the individual note merges back into the symphony. Ethan felt a pang of sadness. So they forget? They lose themselves? They do not lose themselves, the being said gently. They remember themselves as more than they were. Imagine a drop of water returning to the ocean. Does it lose itself, or does it remember it was always the ocean, just temporarily experiencing what it was like to be separate? Ethan sat with that image, a drop becoming the ocean. It was beautiful and terrifying. What about grief, he asked. The people left behind. Does the person who died feel that? Do they know they're being mourned? They feel it, the being said. Not as pain, but as connection. Grief is love that has nowhere to go. And because love is a frequency that crosses all dimensions, the one who has transitioned feels it as warmth, as being remembered, as still mattering. So when I grieve someone, they know. Yes, and they send their own frequency back. You may not hear it as words, but you feel it as comfort, as signs, as moments of unexpected peace. Grief and love are entangled. One does not exist without the other. Ethan thought about all the people he'd lost. His father, his grandmother, the patients whose faces he still remembered years later. He'd always thought his grief was one-sided, a mourning that went into the void and disappeared. But maybe it hadn't. Maybe they'd felt every moment of it. Is there a way to communicate with them? He asked. The people who've died. Can we reach them? You already do, the being said. Every time you think of them with love, every time you speak their name, every time you feel their presence in a moment of stillness. Communication does not require words. It only requires attention. But what about mediums? People who claim to talk to the dead. Some are sincere and have developed the sensitivity to perceive the echoes of those who have transitioned. Others are interpreting their own intuition and calling it contact. Both can be true. The field is generous. It will meet you wherever you reach. Ethan nodded slowly. He thought about his father, who died when Ethan was 19. He'd never told him he loved him, never said goodbye. If I wanted to reach my father, Ethan said quietly, how would I do it? The smallest being pulsed softly. Sit in stillness. Think of him. Not as he was when he died, but as the essence of who he was, the feeling of him. And then speak, not aloud, in your heart. He will feel it. And if you are still enough, you will feel his response. What if I don't feel anything? Then trust that he felt you, and try again. The connection is always there, but the noise of your mind often drowns it out. The quieter you become, the more you will sense. Ethan closed his eyes. He could feel tears coming again. I miss him, he whispered. He knows, the being said, and he is not far. They sat in silence for a while. Ethan let the tears come, let the grief move through him like a wave. And for the first time in his life, grief didn't feel like drowning. It felt like release. When he finally opened his eyes, the beings were still there, their light, steady, and patient. You said earlier that suffering is the friction of consciousness trying to expand, Ethan said. Can you explain that more? Because I've seen people suffer in ways that don't seem to teach anything. Children with cancer, people with dementia who forget their own names. What are they expanding into? The center being's light dimmed, as if in reverence for the weight of the question. Not all suffering is conscious learning, it said. Some suffering is simply the result of being in a dimension where form is fragile. Bodies break, brains deteriorate, cells mutate. That is not punishment. It is the nature of matter. But within that suffering, there is still movement, still evolution. How, Ethan asked. How does a child dying of cancer evolve anything? The child's consciousness is learning what it is like to face impermanence at the edge of innocence. That experience becomes part of the resonance they carry forward. But the learning is not only theirs, it is also the parents, the doctors, the communities. Every being touched by that child's life is being asked to soften, to grieve, to expand their capacity to hold love in the presence of loss. So the child suffers so other people can learn? No, the being said firmly. The child does not suffer for others. The child suffers because form is fragile, but the suffering is not wasted. It becomes part of the field's collective experience. And from that experience, compassion deepens. Medicine advances. Communities learn to hold grief together. The suffering is transformed into understanding. Ethan shook his head. That still feels cruel. It is not cruel. It is costly. There is a difference. Cruelty implies intent to harm. Cost implies value extracted from difficulty. Your dimension is costly, but it is not cruel. And what about people who cause suffering? Ethan asked. Murderers, abusers, people who hurt others deliberately. What happens to them when they die? The beings were silent for a moment. They transition like everyone else, one finally said. Death does not discriminate, but the experience of transition reflects the resonance they carry. Those who have caused great harm often experience what you might call a life review, a direct, unfiltered encounter with the pain they inflicted. Not as punishment, but as recognition. Do they suffer? They feel, deeply, and in feeling the pain they caused, they begin to understand. That understanding is the first step toward healing. Not all consciousness heals immediately. Some remain in states of confusion or remorse for long periods. But eventually, all are drawn back into the field, because the field does not reject, it integrates. So there's no hell? Not as a place, but there are states of consciousness that feel like hell. Guilt, shame, the refusal to forgive oneself, those states can persist after death, held by the consciousness itself, but they are not eternal. Nothing is eternal except the field itself. Ethan felt a strange sense of relief. So everyone is forgiven eventually? Everyone forgives themselves eventually. God does not need to forgive. God never condemned. The hours passed. Ethan asked questions, and the beings answered. They spoke about depression, about how past and future are constructs of linear perception. They spoke about free will, about how choice is real within the constraints of form, but consciousness itself is guided by a deeper rhythm. They spoke about love, about how it is the fundamental force of the universe, more foundational than gravity, more powerful than entropy. And slowly, piece by piece, Ethan's understanding shifted. He'd spent his life thinking he was small, insignificant, a fragile body trying to survive in an indifferent universe. But now he saw differently. He wasn't small, he was vast. He was a localized expression of infinite awareness, temporarily focused into the shape of a man named Ethan Cole. And when this body ended, he wouldn't disappear. He would simply expand back into the field, carrying everything he'd learned, everything he'd loved, everything he'd been. I've been saving bodies, he said quietly. My whole career, I've been trying to save bodies. Yes, the center being said. But that's not what matters, is it? It matters, but it is not all that matters. The body is the instrument, but the song is the consciousness. You were learning to steady the instrument so the song could finish its note with grace. Ethan looked down at his hands, scarred, calloused, the hands of a man who'd spent decades trying to hold back death. I wish I'd known this sooner, he said. You knew it, the smallest being said gently. You just couldn't hear it yet. You needed to be broken open first. That's what your own death was for. Ethan looked up at them, his eyes glistening. Thank you, he said, for coming back, for teaching me. We did not teach you, the being said. We only reminded you. The light in the room began to soften. The being's form started to fade, not disappearing but becoming translucent, like mist thinning in morning sun. Are you leaving? Ethan asked. We are always here, the center being said, but you no longer need to see us to feel us. We will remain at the edge of your awareness. When you need us, turn your attention inward. We will answer. Will I see you again, like this? Perhaps, if the need arises, but the next part of your journey is not with us. It is with the living. Show them what you've learned, not through words, through presence. The light faded further. Ethan could barely see them now. How, he asked. How do I show them? The smallest being's voice came one last time, soft as a breath, by seeing them as we see you. As light, pretending to be solid. As God, pretending to be human. As infinite, playing at being small. And then they were gone. The apartment was quiet, dark, ordinary. But Ethan wasn't. He sat in the silence, feeling the hum of his own aliveness, his breath, his heartbeat, the soft pulse of awareness moving through him. For the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to be present. Not thinking about the past, not worrying about the future, just here, just now, just this breath, and the infinite field breathing through it. He stood slowly, walked to the window, and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, people were dying. And somewhere out there, people were being born. And it was all the same thing, a continuation, a participation, a pulse in the infinite current of what some people called God. Ethan pressed his hand against the glass. It was cold, solid, real, but beneath the solidity, he could feel it now, the vibration, the hum, the field. Everything was alive. Everything was sacred. Everything was called, experiencing what it was like to be everything. He closed his eyes and smiled. The world hummed softly back. And this time he understood the language. The next morning, Ethan woke before dawn. He didn't set an alarm. He just opened his eyes in the darkness and felt the pull to be awake, to be present, to meet the day as it arrived rather than stumbling into it half asleep. He made coffee and sat by the window, watching the sky shift from black to deep blue to pale gold. The city was quiet at this hour. A few cars moved through distant streets. A jogger passed below, breath visible in the cold air. Somewhere, a dog barked once and then fell silent. Ethan sipped his coffee and felt the warmth spread through his chest. He noticed things he'd never paid attention to before. The way the steam curled from the cup in delicate spirals, the weight of the ceramic in his hands, the faint hum of the refrigerator behind him. Steady and alive. Everything was so simple, and yet beneath the simplicity, he could feel it. The field, the current, the infinite awareness moving through every molecule, every breath, every moment. He wasn't separate from it. He'd never been separate from it. He was it. For a while, he just sat with that knowing, not thinking about it, not analyzing it, just feeling it, the way you feel sunlight on your skin or music in your chest. When the light had fully risen, he dressed and went to work. Sophia was already at the station when he arrived, restocking the ambulance. She looked up as he approached, her expression careful. "Hey," she said, "how are you feeling?" "Good," Ethan said, and he meant it. She studied him for a moment. "You seem different?" "Different how?" "I don't know. Lighter maybe, like something let go of you?" Ethan smiled. Maybe it did. They took the first call at 8:30, an elderly woman who'd fallen in her bathroom, minor laceration on her forehead, possible concussion. When they arrived, she was sitting on her couch, holding a bloody towel to her head, looking embarrassed. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I didn't want to bother anyone. I just slipped on the rug." "You're not bothering us," Ethan said, kneeling beside her. "That's why we're here." He gently removed the towel and examined the wound. It wasn't deep, but it would need a few stitches. As he worked, he felt the woman's fear, not of the injury, but of being a burden, of taking up space in a world that felt too busy for her. "What's your name?" he asked. "Margaret." "Margaret, you did the right thing by calling. This could have been much worse if you'd ignored it." She looked at him, her eyes watery. "My husband used to take care of things like this. He passed 2 years ago. I still forget sometimes that he's not here." Ethan paused, his hand still holding the gauze. He looked at her, really looked at her. Not just at the wound, but at the woman herself, the lines on her face that mapped decades of living, the wedding ring still on her finger, the loneliness that hung around her like a fragrance. "He's still here," Ethan said quietly. Margaret blinked. "What?" "Your husband. He's still here. Not the way he was, but his love for you didn't stop when he died. It just changed form. You can still feel it, if you pay attention. In the quiet moments, in the way certain memories make you smile." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "You really believe that?" "I know it," Ethan said. She reached out and squeezed his hand. "Thank you." They transported her to the hospital, got her stitched up, made sure she had someone to check on her at home. When they left, Sophia looked at Ethan with a strange expression. "What you said to her," Sophia began, "about her husband still being here. Do you really believe that, or were you just trying to make her feel better?" Ethan thought about how to answer. A month ago, he would have said he was just being kind, offering comfort he didn't actually believe in, but now, "I believe it," he said. "I don't expect you to, but I do." Sophia was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded. "Okay." They didn't talk about it again. But Ethan noticed Sophia watching him throughout the day, as if trying to figure out what had changed. Over the next few weeks, Ethan moved through his work with a presence he'd never had before. He stopped rushing, stopped seeing patients as problems to solve or bodies to stabilize. He started seeing them as people, as consciousness temporarily wearing the shape of flesh, each one connected to the same infinite field he'd glimpsed. When he placed his hands on someone's chest to start compressions, he didn't just push, he connected. He felt the life beneath his palms, the stubborn pulse of awareness refusing to let go. And when he couldn't bring them back, when the monitor stayed flat and the room fell silent, he didn't feel like a failure anymore. He felt like a guide, someone who'd steadied the crossing. One night, they got a call to a hospice facility. A man in his 70s, end-stage lung cancer, unresponsive. The nurses had called as a formality, but everyone knew there was nothing to be done. When Ethan and Sophia arrived, the man, his name was Robert, was lying in bed, his breathing shallow and irregular. His daughter sat beside him, holding his hand, her face wet with tears. "He's been like this for hours," she said. "The nurses said it won't be long." Ethan approached the bed slowly. He looked at Robert's face, pale, gaunt, but somehow peaceful. His eyes were closed. His chest rose and fell in uneven rhythms, each breath sounding like it might be the last. "Has he been in pain?" Ethan asked. "They gave him morphine," the daughter said. "He's comfortable, but I don't want him to be alone when he goes." Ethan knelt beside the bed. He placed one hand gently on Robert's shoulder. "He's not alone," Ethan said, "and he won't be, even after." The daughter looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean that wherever he's going, it's not empty. It's full. Full of everything he's ever loved. Full of everyone who's loved him. He's just changing rooms." The daughter's face crumpled. "How do you know that?" Ethan met her eyes. "Because I've seen it." She stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for dishonesty or false comfort. But she must have found something true there, because she nodded and looked back at her father. "Can you stay?" she asked. "Just for a little while?" "Of course." Ethan stayed. Sophia stayed too, standing quietly by the door. They watched as Robert's breathing slowed, as the spaces between breaths grew longer, as his body began the final process of letting go. And then something happened that Ethan would never be able to fully explain. The air in the room shifted. It didn't change the temperature, it didn't move, but something about it became softer, lighter, as if the space itself was opening to receive what was coming. Ethan felt the presence before he saw it. The beings, they were there at the edge of his perception, their light so faint it was almost invisible. But he could feel them. 3 forms, standing near the bed, waiting. Robert's breathing stopped. The monitor flatlined, and for just a moment, a single crystalline moment, Ethan saw it. Robert's consciousness, lifting from his body like mist rising from water. Not a shape exactly, not a ghost, just awareness, freed from the anchor of flesh. The beings moved closer. Their light touched Robert's light, and then gently they guided him. Not away, not up, just through into the field. Ethan watched, tears streaming down his face, as Robert's consciousness dissolved into something larger, something infinite, something he recognized as the same light he'd seen when his own heart had stopped. The beings turned to look at Ethan. They didn't speak, but he felt their acknowledgement. "You see now," and then they were gone. The room was just a room again. Robert's body lay still on the bed. The monitor beeped its flat, endless tone. But Ethan wasn't sad. He was in awe. The daughter was sobbing, her head on her father's chest. Sophia moved to comfort her, one hand on her shoulder. Ethan stood slowly. He walked to the window and looked out at the night sky. Stars, distant, burning. Ancient light finally arriving after traveling for years through the void. He thought about Robert's light, traveling too. Not through space, but through states of being, from form to formlessness, from separation to unity. "He's okay," Ethan said quietly. The daughter looked up at him, her face streaked with tears. "How do you know?" Ethan turned from the window and met her eyes. "Because I've been where he is, and it's not dark, it's not lonely, it's full of light, full of love. He's home now." She stared at him, and then something in her face softened. She nodded, wiped her eyes, and looked back at her father's peaceful face. "Thank you," she whispered. In the ambulance on the way back, Sophia was quiet. Finally, she spoke. "What happened in there?" "What do you mean?" You were crying, and you said you've been where he is. What did you mean by that? Ethan looked out the window at the passing streetlights. He thought about telling her, about the beings, about the field, about everything he'd seen and learned. But something told him not to. Not yet. Not like this. When I died, he said slowly, I saw something. I don't know how to explain it, but it changed the way I think about death. It's not an ending. It's just a continuation. Sophia was silent for a long time. Do you think that's real? She finally asked. Or was it just your brain shutting down? I don't know, Ethan admitted. Maybe it was both. Maybe the brain shutting down is what lets us see what's always been there. She nodded slowly. I hope you're right. Me too. They didn't talk about it again, but something had shifted between them. A recognition, a respect. Sophia stopped looking at him like he was broken. She started looking at him like he knew something she didn't. The weeks turned into months. Ethan continued to work, continued to respond to calls, continued to hold the hands of the dying and steady the hearts of the living. But now every shift felt different, sacred almost. He started to see patterns, the way certain patients would calm when he touched them, as if his presence carried a frequency of peace. The way people who'd been unconscious would sometimes open their eyes and say they'd seen light. The way families would thank him, not just for saving their loved ones, but for the way he made them feel safe. One night, an elderly man named Thomas had a heart attack in a grocery store. By the time Ethan arrived, Thomas was in cardiac arrest. They worked on him for 20 minutes. Compressions, shocks, medications. Nothing worked. Finally, Ethan called it. Time of death, 11:47 p.m. But as he stepped back from the body, he felt the familiar presence, the beings at the edge of perception, and he saw Thomas's light lifting, free, moving into the field. The grocery store manager, a young woman with kind eyes, stood nearby, shaking. Is he? He's gone, Ethan said, but he's not suffering. He's at peace with boss. She looked at him, confused. How do you know? Ethan almost said it, almost told her what he'd seen, but instead, he just smiled gently. Trust me, he's okay. She nodded, tears in her eyes. Thank you. On his day off, Ethan drove to the cemetery. It was a clear October afternoon, the air cool and sharp, the sky a flawless blue. Leaves covered the ground in shades of gold and rust, crunching softly beneath his feet as he walked through the rows of graves. He found Liam's grave near the back, beneath a young oak tree. The headstone was simple, just his name, his dates, and a small engraving. Beloved son. Ethan stood there for a long time, hands in his pockets, looking at the carved letters. He'd been here once before, the week after Liam died. He'd stood in almost the same spot, crushed by guilt, certain that he'd failed. But now he felt something different. Gratitude. He knelt and placed one hand on the cool stone. Hey, Liam, he said quietly. I don't know if you can hear me, but I wanted to come and say thank you. The wind moved through the oak tree, rustling the leaves. I tried to save you. I tried so hard. And when I couldn't, I thought I'd failed you. I carried that for a long time. He paused, feeling the words gather in his chest. But then I died, and I saw you. I saw your light, and you showed me that I didn't fail. I steadied you. I helped you cross gently. And that matters. It mattered to you. It matters to me. His voice broke slightly. So thank you for forgiving me, for teaching me, for being the reason I finally understood. The wind shifted. The leaves above him whispered. And for just a moment, Ethan felt it. A warmth, a presence, a sense that he wasn't alone. He smiled, tears on his cheeks. You're still here, aren't you? The warmth pulsed, gentle and sure. Ethan closed his eyes and let himself feel it fully. The connection, the love, the unbroken thread between them. I'll keep helping people, he said, the way I helped you, I promise. The warmth lingered a moment longer and then softened, like a hand releasing after a long embrace. Ethan stood, wiped his face, and looked at the headstone one last time. Rest easy, kid. He turned and walked back through the cemetery, the leaves crunching beneath his feet, the sky vast and open above him. That night, the beings returned. Ethan was sitting on his couch reading when the air began to shimmer. He looked up, unsurprised, and watched as the three forms materialized in front of him. "You're back," he said, the center being pulsed softly. "We never left, but you no longer needed to see us. So why now? Because you have integrated what we showed you, and now there is one more thing to understand." Ethan set his book aside. "What's that?" The smallest being moved closer. "You have been wondering if what you experienced was real. If we are real, if the field is real, or if it was all a creation of your dying brain, a beautiful illusion to ease the fear of death." Ethan nodded slowly. "I've thought about that, yeah. And what have you decided?" He thought for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I've decided it doesn't matter." The beings pulsed in unison, a ripple of light that felt like approval. "Why doesn't it matter?" the center being asked. "Because real or not, it changed me. It made me kinder, more present. It gave me a way to comfort people who are dying. It made me see the world as sacred instead of empty. So whether it's objectively true or just a story my mind created, it's true enough." The smallest being's light brightened. "That is wisdom. Truth is not a thing you possess," the center being said. "It is a lens through which you see, and the lens you now carry lets you see love where you once saw only loss. That is what matters." Ethan leaned forward. "So you're saying I might have made all of this up?" "We are saying that the question is less important than you think. Consciousness creates reality through observation. You observed us, we observed you. In that mutual observation, we became real to each other. Whether we exist independently of your awareness is a question that assumes separation. But there is no separation. We are all expressions of the same field. So in a sense, you did create us, and we created you, and God created both. And all of it is true." Ethan laughed softly. "That's a non-answer. It is the only answer that doesn't limit the infinite." They sat in silence for a moment. Then the center being spoke again. "You asked us once if you would see us again. We told you that you would if the need arose. But the truth is, you will always see us, not as forms, but as presence, in every moment of stillness, in every act of compassion, in every time you choose love over fear. We are not separate from you. We are the part of you that remembers what you are." Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. "Are you saying goodbye?" "We are saying you no longer need us to appear. You carry us now. You carry the field. You are becoming a bridge between worlds. Someone who walks in form but remembers the formless. That is what you were always meant to be." "I don't feel like a bridge," Ethan said. "I feel like a guy who's just trying to do his job." "That is exactly what a bridge is," the smallest being said. "Ordinary, functional, but connecting two places that would otherwise be separate." The being's light began to fade. "Will I forget you?" Ethan asked suddenly. "No, but you will stop needing to remember us. You will simply be what we taught you. And if I need you, if I'm confused or scared or lost, turn inward. We are always there, not as us, as you." The light dimmed further. "Thank you," Ethan said, his voice thick, "for everything. Thank you," the center being said, "for listening." And then they were gone. The apartment was quiet, empty, ordinary. But Ethan didn't feel alone. He felt held by something larger than himself, something infinite and intimate all at once. He stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the city. Lights in windows, cars on streets, people living their lives unaware that they were all notes in the same endless song. Ethan pressed his hand against the glass and smiled. "I see you," he whispered. And somewhere in the field whispered back, "We see you too."